The lace was scratching my skin. That's the first thing I remember. Not the flowers, not the music, but the literal, physical itch of a $5,000 mistake. I was standing at the front of the Cathedral of St. Jude, my hand trembling in Griffin's. Our eyes were locked, or so I thought. I was looking for forever. He was looking for an exit. Then the sound happened. It wasn't a thunderclap. It wasn't a protest from a jilted lover in the back pew. It was the sharp, synthetic buzz of a smartphone vibrating against the marble altar. Griffin had insisted on keeping it on him. Expectant merger, he'd said that morning. Just in case. I was a fool. I believed him, because I wanted the fairy tale. The priest was mid-sentence, something about in sickness and in health, when Griffin's hand jumped. He didn't just flinch, he recoiled. He looked at his wrist, at the smartwatch glowing under his cuff. I saw the name. Scarlett. His ex. The woman who had supposedly moved to Paris 3 years ago. The woman who was just a memory. He didn't silence it. He didn't ignore it. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a stranger. I have to take this, he whispered. Griffin, we're saying our vows. I breathed, the words catching in a throat that felt like it was closing up. Don't you dare. It's an emergency, Elara. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Just wait. He let go of my hand. The cold air that rushed in to fill the space where his palm had been was the most honest thing I'd felt in years. He turned his back on the priest, the 300 guests, and the woman who had spent 18 months planning a life with him. He walked down that aisle, not with me, but away from me. The silence in the cathedral was deafening. It was a physical weight. I could hear the collective intake of breath from my mother's side of the family. I could hear the hushed, panicked whispers of the bridesmaids behind me. I stood there, a white-clad monument to humiliation, staring at the heavy oak doors as they swung shut behind him. 5 minutes passed. 10. My maid of honor, Sarah, stepped forward and touched my shoulder. Elara, do you want to go to the vestry? We can wait there. No, I said. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone colder. Someone harder. I'm staying right here. I wanted to see it. I wanted to witness the exact moment my life shattered, so I could never, ever be tempted to glue the pieces back together. Because in that silence, a realization hit me like a physical blow. Griffin wasn't coming back. Not really. Even if he walked back through those doors in 30 seconds, the man I thought I loved was already dead. He had chosen a ghost over a wife. But the universe has a funny way of closing one door and blowing the windows out of another. Just as the first sob began to bubble up in my chest, the kind of sob that ends a person, a man stood up from the front row on the groom's side. He wasn't one of Griffin's frat brothers or his cousins. He was Weston Blake, the man who owned the firm where Griffin worked, the man who owned half the skyline in the city. He was the CEO everyone whispered about, the one who was supposed to be the guest of honor, to bolster Griffin's career.
He didn't look pitying.
He looked disgusted.
But not at me.
Weston stepped out into the aisle. He didn't go toward the door Griffin had exited. He walked straight toward the altar. Straight toward me. The guests went silent again. You could have heard a pin drop on the velvet runner. He stopped 2 steps below me. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost more than my entire wedding, with eyes that looked like they had seen the beginning and the end of the world. He isn't coming back, Elara, Weston said. His voice was a deep, resonant rasp that cut through the stagnant air of the church. I just saw him through the side window. He's in his car. She's in the passenger seat. The world tilted. The emergency wasn't a phone call. It was a pickup. He had used our wedding as a staging ground for a getaway. So, Weston continued, reaching out a hand, not to grab mine, but to offer a choice. You have a choice. You can collapse, which is what they expect. You can run, which is what they want. Or you can finish what you started, just with a different partner. My heart skipped a beat, then hammered against my ribs. What are you saying? I need a wife for the merger on Monday. You need a husband to keep your dignity, Weston said, his eyes burning into mine with an intensity that made Griffin's love look like a flickering candle. The paperwork is the same. The party is already paid for. Marry me instead. I looked at the doors. Then I looked at the man standing before me. I didn't know him, but I knew the man who had just left me. The priest is still standing there, I whispered, a manic spark of lightning striking my soul. Are you serious? Weston leaned in, his scent of sandalwood and cold ambition surrounding me. I never joke about my investments, Elara.
And right now?
You look like the best investment I've ever seen. I looked at the crowd. I looked at the altar. And then, I reached out and took his hand. Here are the next parts of the story. I have ensured each part maintains the word count and emotional intensity you requested. The priest looked like he'd seen a ghost, or maybe just a miracle he didn't know how to categorize. His Bible was shaking. Behind me, the gasps from the pews had turned into a low, frantic hum, like a disturbed beehive. I could feel my mother's eyes boring into the back of my head. I knew she was probably seconds away from fainting or screaming. But I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked back, I'd see the empty space where my life was supposed to be. Instead, I looked at Weston. He wasn't warm. He wasn't smiling that rehearsed, groom-on-a-cake smile that Griffin had practiced in the mirror for weeks. Weston looked at me like a strategist looking at a map. There was a cold, calculated strength in his grip that anchored me to the floor. Proceed, Weston said. It wasn't a request to the priest. It was a command. I don't have the paperwork for a Mr. Blake, the priest stammered, glancing between us. The names on the license can be amended at the clerk's office on Monday, Weston replied, his voice cutting through the priest's hesitation like a blade. For now, the vows are what the people came to see. The union is what matters. Finish the ceremony. I felt like I was watching a movie of my own life.
My brain was screaming at me.
Elara, what are you doing? This man is a stranger. This man is your ex-fiancé's boss. This is insane. But every time I thought about walking away, I pictured Griffin's car. I pictured Scarlett sitting where I was supposed to be. I pictured the headlines tomorrow. Abandoned bride left at altar.
No.
Not today. Weston Blake, take you, Elara, to be my wife, he began. He didn't wait for the priest to prompt him. He knew the words, but he didn't say them with the flowery sentiment Griffin had used. He said them like he was signing a treaty, like he was swearing an oath of protection over a territory he had just acquired. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. When he said richer, a small, bitter smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He knew exactly what he was offering me. He was offering me a shield made of gold and iron. Then it was my turn. My voice felt brittle, like dried leaves. Elara, take you, Weston, to be my husband. As I said the words, I felt a shift in the room. The pity was evaporating, replaced by a thick, suffocating cloud of shock and awe. This wasn't a tragedy anymore. It was a scandal of epic proportions. When it came time for the rings, Weston didn't reach for the simple gold band Griffin had picked out, the one that was currently sitting in Griffin's pocket as he drove away. Weston reached into his own vest pocket. He pulled out a ring that looked like it belonged in a museum. A massive, emerald-cut diamond flanked by baguettes, set in platinum. It was heavy. It was cold. He slid it onto my finger. It was slightly too big, but the weight of it felt like a shackle I was happy to wear if it meant I didn't have to be the victim. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the priest whispered, sounding more like he was declaring a state of emergency than a marriage. You may kiss the bride. The silence returned. Everyone was leaning forward. This was the moment of truth. Would he? Would I? Weston stepped closer. He didn't lean down for a chaste peck on the cheek. He placed his hand on the nape of my neck, his thumb brushing against my jawline. It was a possessive, grounding touch. He leaned in, and for a second, his lips were inches from mine. Don't blink, Elara, he whispered, so low only I could hear. This is where we win. He kissed me. It wasn't the kiss of a lover. It was the kiss of an ally. It was firm, purposeful, and lasted just long enough to make everyone in the room believe that maybe, just maybe, this had been the plan all along. As we turned to face the crowd, Weston didn't let go of my hand. He held it high. My father stood up, his face a mask of confusion, but Weston gave him a single, sharp nod. We began the walk down the aisle. The wedding march started playing, but it sounded different now. It sounded like a war drum. With every step I took past the people who had come to watch me fall, I felt a little bit of the old Elara die. The girl who believed in fairy tales was gone. The woman who was going to survive had arrived. But as we reached the oak doors, the reality of what I'd just done hit me. I wasn't going to a honeymoon in Maui with Griffin. I was going into a limousine with a man who viewed me as an investment. We stepped out into the sunlight, and the camera flashes were blinding. The press was already there. Elias Vance didn't go anywhere without a tail. Smile, Weston muttered, his grip tightening. The whole world is watching. As the limo door opened, I saw a flash of silver in the distance. A car speeding away. Griffin. He had stopped to watch. I didn't look away. I leaned into Weston, making sure the giant diamond on my hand caught the sun, and I smiled until it hurt. But as the door closed and the glass went opaque, the smile dropped. The silence inside the car was different. It was cold. "So," I said, my voice finally breaking. "What now?" Weston didn't look at me. He was already on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen.
Now?
"Now we go to the reception. We dance. We toast. And then, Elara, we start the process of making Griffin wish he had never been born." The reception was held at the Grand Sterling Ballroom. It was supposed to be a room filled with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses for a perfect couple. Instead, it felt like a courtroom. Every person who approached us for a congratulations was really just trying to get a look at the wreckage. They wanted to see if I had mascara running down my face. They wanted to see if Weston was actually touching me. "You're doing well," Weston murmured, leaning down as if to whisper a sweet nothing. In reality, he was checking his watch. "Another hour of this, and then we leave for the penthouse." "The penthouse?" I asked, my heart thumping. I was still in the dress. I still felt like I was wearing a costume. "Weston, we haven't even talked about any of this. The merger. This deal you mentioned. Business happens in the boardroom, Elara. Tonight is theater." He took a flute of champagne from a passing waiter and handed it to me.
"Drink."
"You look like you're about to shatter, and I can't have my wife looking fragile." My wife. The words felt like lead. I looked across the room and saw my mother. She was cornered by 3 of the city's most notorious gossips. I could see the way her hands were fluttering, the way she was trying to maintain some shred of dignity. I realized then that my humiliation wasn't just mine. It was a stain on my family. Griffin hadn't just left me. He had tried to erase me. "Why me?" I asked, turning back to Weston. "You could have any woman in this room. You could have stopped the wedding, fired Griffin, and moved on. Why step in?" Weston finally looked at me. Truly looked at me. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were sharp. "Griffin is a talented liar, Elara. But he's weak. He thought he could use my company's resources to fund his little escape with Scarlett. He thought he could embarrass me by leaving a vacuum at the head of this merger's social front." He stepped closer, closing the gap between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "I don't like being embarrassed. And I don't like people who break contracts. By marrying you, I've secured the narrative. You aren't the jilted bride. You're the woman who realized she deserved the king, not the pawn. And by Monday morning, Griffin won't just be unemployed. He'll be unhireable." "You're using me for revenge," I whispered. "We are using each other for survival," he corrected. "Don't pretend you didn't see the way Griffin looked at you when we walked out of that church. You wanted him to hurt. I'm just the man providing the weapon."
The music changed.
A slow, haunting melody. Our first dance. It was supposed to be our song, Griffin's and mine. The DJ, clearly confused or perhaps bribed by Weston's people, didn't play the upbeat pop song Griffin had chosen. Instead, a cello began to moan a deep, dark ballad. Weston led me to the center of the floor. The lights dimmed, and the spotlight found us. I felt like a deer in the headlights. "Hand on my shoulder," Weston commanded softly. I obeyed. As we moved, I felt the eyes of 300 people on us. I saw the cameras. People were filming this. It was going to be on every social media platform by midnight. "He's here," Weston said suddenly. My breath hitched.
Who?
Griffin. He's standing by the service entrance. He couldn't stay away. He wants to see the fire he started. I wanted to turn. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to demand to know why Scarlett was worth more than the 5 years we had spent together. Don't turn around. Weston's voice was a low growl. Look at me. Only me. If you look at him, he wins. If you look at me like I'm the only man in the world, he loses everything. I looked up into Weston's dark, inscrutable eyes. I forced myself to soften my expression. I moved closer, letting my head rest against his shoulder, masking the fact that I was shaking. I let my hand slide up to the back of his neck, the massive diamond on my finger practically glowing in the spotlight. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow near the kitchen doors. A man in a tuxedo, looking frantic, looking small. Weston spun me around, and for a split second, I locked eyes with Griffin. He looked horrified. He looked like he had expected to find me in a heap on the floor, not in the arms of the most powerful man in the state. He took a step forward, his mouth opening as if to call my name, but then he saw Weston's hand on my waist. He saw the way Weston looked at him, with absolute, crushing indifference. Griffin turned and fled. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years.
Power.
It was addictive.
It was terrifying.
As the song ended, Weston didn't let go. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. The car is waiting. We've given them enough to talk about for a lifetime. We walked out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and into the cool night air. The transition was so fast, I barely had time to think. 1 minute I was a bride, the next I was a pawn, and now I was heading into the unknown with a man who dealt in billions and spoke in ultimatums. As we climbed into the back of the car, I looked at the ring on my finger. What happens tomorrow, Weston? He leaned back against the leather seat, the shadows of the city's streetlights dancing across his face. Tomorrow, Elara, we go to work. I'll have my lawyers draft the post-nuptial agreement. You'll have a budget, a staff, and a new identity. You will be the face of Blake International. And in return, you will never speak to Griffin again, no matter how much he begs. And if I want more than just a budget? I asked, my voice gaining a new edge. If I want to actually help you take him down? Weston looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. A smirk played on his lips. I thought you might say that.
Get some sleep, Elara.
Monday is going to be a very long day. The sun hadn't even fully risen over the city when the first notification pinged on the marble nightstand. I hadn't slept. Not a wink. I had spent the night in the guest wing of Weston's sprawling penthouse, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the woman in the mirror with the name on the marriage certificate. I picked up the phone. It was a news alert. Blake Vance nuptials. The switch of the century. Who is Elara Blake? There were photos. Photos of me looking radiant, photos of Weston looking possessive, and one grainy shot of Griffin standing alone by a dumpster behind the church. The narrative was already set. The winner and the loser. A knock came at the door. 5 minutes, Elara. Your stylist is here. Weston didn't ask if I was ready. He assumed I was. By 8 a.m., I was transformed. I wasn't in white lace anymore. I was wearing a power suit, charcoal gray, tailored so sharply it could draw blood. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, low bun. I looked like I was ready to fire someone. Weston was in the kitchen, drinking black coffee and reading the Financial Times. He looked up and for a second, he actually stopped talking to his assistant. Better, he said simply. The car is downstairs. Griffin will be at the office by 9. He thinks he's coming in to sign his severance and walk away with a comfortable check. He thinks he can take Scarlett to Europe on my dime. And he's not. I asked, my heart racing. Griffin violated the morality clause in his contract the second he caused a public scene involving a primary investor, me, Weston said, standing up and buttoning his coat. He's not getting a check. He's getting a lawsuit. And you're going to be the one to hand it to him. The drive to the Blake International Tower was silent. The city moved outside the tinted windows, oblivious to the fact that a life was about to be dismantled. When we arrived, the lobby was humming. People stared. they whispered. But as soon as Weston stepped out of the elevator on the executive floor, the silence returned. We walked toward the glass-walled conference room. I could see him. Griffin. He was sitting at the long mahogany table, looking disheveled. He hadn't shaved. He looked like the man I should have been mourning, but all I felt was a cold, hard knot of anger. Sitting next to him, looking bored and scrolling on her phone, was Scarlett. She was wearing a red dress, deliberate, I'm sure. A splash of color in a world of gray. Weston opened the door. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the head of the table and sat down. I stood right beside him, my hand resting on the back of his chair. Griffin looked up, and the blood drained from his face. Elara? What? What are you doing here? She's Mrs. Blake now, Griffin, Weston said, his voice like ice. I suggest you address her with the respect her position demands. Scarlett scoffed, finally looking up. Oh, please. We all know this is a stunt. Elara, honey, you look exhausted. Why don't you go home and cry into a tub of ice cream like a normal person? I didn't flinch. I didn't even look at her. I looked directly at Griffin. I'm not here to cry, Griffin. I'm here to finish what you started. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents. I slid them across the table. They didn't stop until they hit Griffin's trembling hands. What is this? Griffin whispered. That, I said, my voice steady and cold, is a formal notice of termination for cause. It's also a summons. We're suing you for breach of contract, misappropriation of company funds. We found the receipts for that engagement trip to Paris you took Scarlett on last month, and public defamation. Griffin's eyes went wide. Misappropriation? I was going to pay that back. With what? Weston asked, leaning forward. You're broke, Griffin. I've frozen your corporate accounts. Your car is a company lease. The repo man is in the parking lot right now. And as for your apartment, the lease is under the firm's name. You have until noon to vacate. Scarlett stood up, her face turning a blotchy red. You can't do this. He's the lead architect on the Vance project. I corrected. I've spent the last 4 hours reviewing the project files. You made a mistake on the structural calculations for the south wing, Griffin. A big one. If I hadn't caught it, the firm would have been liable for millions. That's gross negligence. Griffin looked like he was going to vomit. You reviewed the files? You don't even know architecture, Elara. I spent 5 years helping you study for your exams, Griffin. I wrote your thesis while you were out drinking with the boys. I know your work better than you do, I said, leaning over the table until I was inches from his face. And I know exactly where you're weak. Griffin looked at the papers, then at Scarlett, who was already reaching for her purse, her expression shifting from arrogance to calculation. She was realizing the ship was sinking. Scarlett. Griffin reached for her hand. She pulled away. I told you this was a bad idea, Griffin. You said you had it handled. She walked out of the room without looking back. Griffin was left alone in the center of the glass box, surrounded by the empire he had tried to cheat. Weston stood up. We're done here. Security will escort you out. As we walked out of the conference room, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. It was Weston. He wasn't looking at the door.
He was looking at me.
You handled that well, he said.
There was no sarcasm in his voice.
Better than I expected. I told you, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'm a good investment. We'll see, Weston replied. Because that was just the beginning. Griffin was the small fish. Now we have to deal with the people who sent Scarlett to find him in the first place. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Weston's eyes darkened. You didn't think this was just about a love triangle, did you? Someone wanted Griffin to fail. Someone wanted my merger to collapse. And now that you're my wife, Elara, they're coming for you, too. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a command center. By Tuesday evening, the silence was replaced by the frantic energy of lawyers, publicists, and security detail. I was no longer Elara, the girl who liked old bookstores and quiet Sundays. I was a brand. And tonight was the Empire Gala, the biggest night on the city's social calendar. It was the night Weston's enemies would be waiting to see if his new investment would crack under pressure. The dress is a message, Weston said, leaning against the doorframe of the dressing room. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was wearing a gown of midnight blue silk that flowed like liquid shadows. It didn't scream for attention. It demanded it. Around my neck sat a collar of sapphires that felt heavier than the vows I'd taken. "Who are we fighting tonight?" I asked, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "The Sterling family," Weston replied, his face tightening. "They've wanted my seat at the table for a decade. They were the ones who funded Scarlett's accidental meeting with Griffin. They knew he was the weak link in my chain. They wanted the merger to fail so they could swoop in and buy the remains. And now, they'll try to prove our marriage is a sham. They'll look for any sign that you're just a paid actress. If they find it, the board will lose confidence, and the merger dies." He walked over and stood behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. In the reflection, we looked like a formidable pair, two people who had built a fortress out of necessity. "Stay close. Don't let them isolate you." The gala was held in a glass pavilion overlooking the river. As we stepped out of the car, the wall of flashbulbs was physical. Weston's arm was a solid bar around my waist, guiding me through the crowd. "Smile, Elara," he whispered. "You're the happiest woman in the world." The room was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and old money. Heads turned like sunflowers following the sun as we moved toward the center of the ballroom. That's when I saw them. Victor Sterling and his daughter, Genevieve. They didn't look like villains. They looked like royalty. "Weston," Victor said, his voice a smooth baritone. "And the mysterious bride." I must say, the news was unexpected. "Life is full of surprises, Victor," Weston replied, his tone clipped. "I believe you haven't met Elara." Genevieve stepped forward, her eyes scanning me like a predator. "It's a lovely dress, Elara. Though, I heard it was rushed. Such a shame you didn't have time to properly prepare for, well, everything." I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't let it show. I thought of Griffin sitting in his empty apartment. I thought of the way I'd felt at the altar. I wasn't that girl anymore. "Preparation is for people who are unsure of their choices, Genevieve," I said, a cool smile touching my lips. "When you know what you want, you don't need a rehearsal." I saw Weston's grip on my waist tighten, not in a warning, but in approval. The night was a blur of calculated conversations and sharp-edged compliments. But as the music swelled, Weston was pulled away by a group of investors. For a moment, I was alone near the balcony.
"He's only using you, you know."
I turned to see Scarlett. She wasn't in rags. She was in a dress that looked suspiciously like a Sterling design. She looked desperate, her eyes darting around the room. "You're just a placeholder, Elara," she hissed, stepping into my space. Weston needed a face for the papers. "Once the merger is signed on Friday, he'll dump you just like Griffin did. Except Weston won't just leave you, he'll erase you." "Is that what the Sterlings told you to say?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Or is that what you're telling yourself to feel better about being a pawn who lost her king?" "He's coming for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Griffin. He's lost his mind, Elara. He thinks you stole his life. He's here tonight. He's going to make a scene that even Weston Blake can't fix." Before I could respond, a crash echoed from the entrance of the pavilion. The music stopped. Griffin was there. He wasn't in a tuxedo. He was in the same rumpled clothes he'd been wearing at the office, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He had a bottle in one hand and a crumpled piece of paper in the other. "Elara," he screamed, his voice cracking. Tell them it's a lie. Tell them you love me." The room went deathly silent. Security was moving, but they were too far. Griffin was stumbling toward me, his face a mask of agony and rage. I looked for Weston, but he was blocked by a wall of people. Griffin reached the edge of the dance floor. "You're mine, not his. You can't just trade me in for a bigger bank account." I stood my ground. Every eye in the city was on me. This was the moment the Sterlings had waited for. The moment the fairy tale shattered. "I didn't trade you in, Griffin," I said, my voice echoing in the stillness. "I outgrew you. And if you have any dignity left, you'll walk out of here before you lose the only thing you have left, your freedom." "I have nothing," he roared, raising the bottle. Just as he stepped toward me, a hand clamped onto his shoulder. It wasn't security. It was Weston. He didn't look angry, he looked bored. "You're making a mess of the carpet, Griffin," Weston said, his voice dangerously low. "And you're upsetting my wife." In one swift motion, Weston signaled the guards. They swarmed Griffin, dragging him out as he screamed my name. The room began to buzz with a new kind of energy, not pity, but shock. I hadn't collapsed. I hadn't cried. I had stood like a queen. Weston walked over to me, smoothing the front of his jacket. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for a crack. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said, taking a deep breath. "But the Sterlings are laughing." "Let them laugh," Weston whispered, leaning in close. "Because they just gave us exactly what we needed. Griffin just proved in front of every witness in this room that he's unstable. And tomorrow, we use that to link him directly to Victor Sterling's payroll." I looked at Weston and realized he hadn't been surprised. He had known Griffin would come. He had let it happen. "You used me as bait," I whispered, the coldness of the realization hitting me harder than the sapphire collar. "I used us as a trap," he corrected. "And it worked." The morning after the gala, the headlines weren't about a jilted bride. They were about a crazed ex-employee and the grace under fire of Elara Blake. My face was everywhere, the new icon of the city's elite. But inside the penthouse, the air was thick with a new kind of tension. Weston was gone before I woke up. On my nightstand was a folder. No note, just a set of bank statements and a map of a shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was the proof. Griffin hadn't just been a bad fiancé, he had been a corporate spy. The Sterlings had been paying him for years to feed them Weston's secrets. Our entire relationship, the 5 years I thought were real, had been a setup. I felt a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of expensive silk could fix. Everything was a lie. My past with Griffin, my present with Weston. I spent the day in the library, digging through the files. I needed to know the truth. If I was an investment, I wanted to know the full value of the stock. That's when I found it. A hidden file in the back of the folder. It wasn't about the merger. It was a photo of me from 5 years ago. I was at my graduation, smiling, holding my degree. In the corner of the photo was a man. A much younger Weston Blake. He hadn't just stepped in at the altar. He had been watching me for years. When the front door chimed that evening, I didn't wait for him to find me. I met him in the hallway. "How long?" I asked, holding up the photo. Weston stopped, his eyes flicking to the picture. He didn't look surprised. He didn't even look guilty. He just sighed and put his briefcase down. "I knew Griffin was a snake the day I hired him," Weston said, his voice flat. "I knew he was working for the Sterlings. And I knew he had a girlfriend who was doing all his work for him. I wanted to see how long it would take for you to realize you were better than him." "You watched me waste 5 years of my life?" I screamed, the rage finally breaking through. "You watched him lie to me? You let me plan a wedding to a man you knew was a traitor?" "I couldn't interfere, Elara. You had to choose to leave him. If I had told you, you would have defended him. You were loyal to a fault. I needed that loyalty, but I needed it directed at me." "So the altar, the rescue, it was all a play?" Weston stepped closer, his presence overwhelming the small space. "The rescue is real. I didn't think he would actually leave you there. I thought he'd have the decency to break it off before the vows. But when he walked out, I saw my chance to save the merger, and to finally have the one person Griffin didn't deserve." "I am not a trophy, Weston." "No," he said, his voice softening for the first time. "You're the architect. I didn't marry you for your face, Elara. I married you because you're the only person in this city smart enough to help me run this empire." Griffin was a fool. He had a diamond, and he treated it like glass. He reached out to touch my face, but I pulled back. "The merger is Friday," I said, my voice cold. "I'll play the part. I'll sign the papers. I'll make sure the Sterlings are ruined. But don't think for a second that I trust you." Weston's eyes darkened. "Fair enough. Trust is expensive. But results? Results are free. Get ready. We have a meeting with the board in an hour." As he walked away, I looked at the photo again. I realized then that I was caught between two monsters, one who wanted to destroy me and one who wanted to own me. But as I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, I saw a third option. I didn't have to be the victim or the investment. I could be the one who took over the game. Friday morning, the day of the merger, the day the Blake and Vance empires would officially become one. The boardroom was on the 80th floor, a cathedral of glass and steel. The Sterlings were there, looking smug. Victor was sitting in the corner, a cigar in his hand, waiting for the moment he thought he could trigger a clause that would strip Weston of his power. Weston sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of granite. I sat at his right hand. "The documents are ready for signature," the lead attorney said, sliding a thick leather-bound book toward Weston. "Before we sign," Victor Sterling interrupted, his voice dripping with false concern, "I'd like to bring up a matter of stability. The events at the gala, the instability of the former lead architect, it brings into question the internal security of Blake International." "The instability has been handled, Victor," Weston said. "Has it? Or is it just being covered up by a convenient marriage?"
Victor looked at me.
"Mrs. Blake, I wonder, do you even know what's in those papers? Or are you just here to look pretty for the cameras?" I looked at the table. I looked at Weston, who was waiting for me to play my part. I looked at the Sterlings, who thought they had me cornered. I stood up. "I know exactly what's in these papers, Victor," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "In fact, I've made a few amendments." Weston frowned, his eyes narrowing. "Elara, what are you doing?" I pulled a small flash drive from my pocket and handed it to the technician at the end of the table. A moment later, the giant screens on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't the merger agreement. It was a series of emails. Emails between Victor Sterling and Scarlett. Emails detailing the plan to sabotage the south wing of the project to drive down the stock price. And most importantly, emails between Victor and a member of Weston's own board. The room exploded into whispers. Victor's face went from smug to ghostly pale. "Where did you get those?" he gasped. "You thought Griffin was your only inside man," I said, walking around the table. But Griffin was sloppy. He kept copies of everything on a private server he thought I didn't know about. I've spent the last 48 hours decrypting his life. I turned to Weston. He was looking at the screen, then at me. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely shocked. And while I was at it, I continued. "I found something else. A clause in the Blake family trust. It states that in the event of a merger, the spouse of the CEO must hold a 10% stake in the new entity to ensure legacy stability." I leaned over the table, looking Victor Sterling in the eye. "That 10%? It's currently being used to vote you out of your seat on the board. Effective immediately." "You can't do that," Genevieve Sterling screamed, standing up. "I just did," I said. "The papers I've been signing all week weren't just for show. Weston might have married me as an investment, but I married him as a partner. And a partner protects the assets." Security entered the room. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Sterling, please follow us." As they were let out in disgrace, the remaining board members looked at me with a new kind of fear. I wasn't the mysterious bride anymore. I was the person who had just saved the empire. Weston stood up. He walked over to me, the room still buzzing around us. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, truly looked at me. "You went behind my back," he said, his voice a low vibration. "You taught me that business happens in the boardroom, Weston," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I just decided to bring my own chair." He looked at the screens, then back at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a CEO or a strategist. It was the smile of a man who had finally met his match. "The merger is signed," he said to the room. "And I believe my wife has some things to say about our new direction." As the board members scrambled to listen, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The itch of the lace was gone. The shadow of Griffin was gone. I wasn't Elara, the victim. I was Elara, the architect of my own destiny. The triumph in the boardroom felt like a fever dream. By that evening, the Sterling family was a memory, their stock plummeting as the news of the sabotage hit the wires. But victory has a way of leaving a bitter aftertaste. I sat in the penthouse, the sprawling city lights flickering below like a sea of diamonds, yet I felt more alone than ever. Weston was in the other room, likely finalizing the destruction of the Sterling estate. He had won. We had won. So, why did I feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop? The drop came in the form of a buzzing phone. Not mine. An old, burner phone I'd found tucked away in Griffin's things, the one I'd used to find the server.
It was a text message.
I'm at the South Wing, the place we were supposed to build together. If you aren't here in 30 minutes, I'm taking the whole thing down. I have the codes, Elara. I have the detonators. My blood turned to ice. Griffin. He wasn't just broken, he was scorched earth. The South Wing was the centerpiece of the merger, a multi-billion-dollar construction site that was currently empty of workers, but full of structural vulnerabilities. I didn't call Weston. I knew what he would do. He'd call the police, cordon off the area, and Griffin would either die or destroy the project. No, this was my mess. I was the one who had written his thesis. I was the one who knew exactly which codes he used for everything. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the service elevator. The construction site was a skeleton of steel and concrete, haunted by the whistling wind. I climbed the temporary stairs to the 40th floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. There, sitting on the edge of a jagged beam, was Griffin. He looked like a shadow of a man. In his hand was a tablet, the screen glowing with a blueprint of the building's support pillars. "You came," he said, not looking up. "I knew you would. You always were the reliable one, Elara." "Griffin, put the tablet down," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "It's over. The Sterlings are gone. There's no one left to pay you." "This isn't about money anymore," he screamed, standing up and swaying dangerously on the edge. "It's about the fact that you're wearing a ring that costs more than my life. It's about the fact that you looked at me in that boardroom like I was a cockroach. You betrayed me, Griffin. For 5 years. I did it for us," he wailed. "I wanted to give you the life you deserved. I got lost. And then Weston Blake happened. He didn't save you, Elara.
He stole you."
He saw a gap in the market and he moved in. He saw a person, I countered, stepping closer. "Which is more than you ever did." "I have the demolition codes for the sublevel supports," Griffin whispered, his thumb hovering over the screen. "If I press this, the South Wing collapses. The merger fails. Weston loses his empire. And we go out together. Like we were supposed to." "Griffin, look at me." I took another step. "You're an architect. You build things. You don't destroy them. If you do this, you aren't a victim. You're just a killer." The silence was broken by a heavy footfall behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The scent of sandalwood and cold power arrived before he did. "Step away from her, Griffin," Weston said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Weston, no." I yelled. "He's unstable. He's a coward," Weston said, walking past me as if Griffin weren't holding a detonator. "He doesn't have the stomach for it. Do it, Griffin. Press the button. Let's see if you have the spine to actually finish something for once in your pathetic life." Griffin's hand shook violently. He looked at the screen, then at Weston's calm, arrogant face. The power dynamic was so skewed it was painful to watch. Griffin realized in that moment that even in his final act of defiance, he was still nothing compared to the man who had replaced him. With a sob, Griffin threw the tablet into the abyss. He collapsed onto the concrete, burying his face in his hands. Weston didn't come for him. He didn't even look at him. He walked straight to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the edge. "I told you to stay at the penthouse," he hissed. "He was going to kill himself, Weston." "He was going to kill you," Weston snapped. "Security is downstairs. They'll handle him. We're leaving." As we walked away, I looked back at Griffin, a small, broken figure in the moonlight. I felt no pity, only a profound sense of closure. The past was finally, truly dead. But as I looked at Weston's tight jaw and the way he gripped my hand, not as a partner, but as a possession, I realized the future was going to be its own kind of battle. The aftermath of this South Wing incident was swept under the rug with the efficiency only a billionaire can buy. Griffin was committed to a private psychiatric facility, one owned by a subsidiary of Blake International. He was gone, erased from the world. But life in the penthouse was changing. The partnership we had forged in the boardroom was starting to feel like a siege. Weston was everywhere. My schedule was managed, my public appearances were scripted, and even the books I read were curated to fit the image of the Mrs. Blake. "You're protecting me too much," I said one night at dinner. The table was 30 feet long, a literal chasm between us. "The sterling still of allies, Elara," Weston replied, not looking up from his steak. "Until the transition is complete, you are a target." "I feel like a prisoner," I said, dropping my fork. The sound echoed in the cavernous room. "You said we were partners. But you're treating me like an asset you're trying to prevent from depreciating." Weston finally looked up. His eyes were unreadable. "Assets don't think, Elara. I know you think. That's why I'm doing this. You're the only thing in my life I can't fully predict, and that makes you the only thing I can't afford to lose." "Is this love, Weston? Or is it just high-level management?" He stood up, walking the length of the table until he was standing over me. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Does it matter? You have the world at your feet. You have a husband who would burn this city down to keep you safe. Most women would kill for this." "I'm not most women," I whispered. "And I don't want the city burned. I want to be able to walk down the street without 4 men in suits following me." "That is a luxury we no longer have," he said, his voice turning to steel. "Accept it." He walked out, leaving me in the silence of the marble tomb. I realized then that Weston hadn't just saved me from Griffin, he had won me. And to a man like Weston Blake, winning meant total control. I began to look for the cracks. I started using the skills I'd learned while decrypting Griffin's life to look into Weston's. I wanted to know where the money went. I wanted to know about the merger that was supposedly so fragile. What I found was a map of a much larger game. The merger wasn't just about construction. It was about a government contract for urban redevelopment, a project worth hundreds of billions. And the only thing standing in the way was a piece of land that Weston didn't own. A piece of land that belonged to a small, non-profit community center in the heart of the city. Weston had been trying to buy them out for years, but they wouldn't budge. So, he had devised a plan to have the city declare the area blighted. And the person who was supposed to sign the final advocacy report for that declaration? It was me. As the head of the Blake Foundation, my signature would provide the humanitarian cover he needed to displace 500 families. He hadn't married me for my architecture skills. He had married me to save me. He had married me because he needed a face the public trusted to sign off on a crime. The realization was a cold splash of water. I wasn't his match. I was his ultimate weapon. And he was currently polishing me for the final strike. I spent the next 3 days playing the part. I was the perfect wife. I smiled at the galas. I nodded at the meetings. But at night I was working. I reached out to the head of the community center, a woman named Maria who had been fighting Weston's lawyers for a decade. "I can help you," I told her over a secure line. "But you have to trust me." "Why should I trust the wife of the man who's trying to destroy my neighborhood?" she asked. "Because," I said, looking at the diamond on my finger that now felt like a lead weight, "I know exactly how he thinks. And I know how to make him stop." The day of the signing arrived. The penthouse was filled with city officials, cameras, and the smell of expensive catering. This was the New Dawn project, the crowning achievement of the Blake-Vance merger. Weston was radiant. He looked like a god among men, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back as he led me to the podium. "My wife, Elara, has spent months reviewing the social impact of this project," Weston told the crowd, his voice full of pride. "She has ensured that the New Dawn isn't just about buildings, but about people." "Elara?" I stepped up to the microphone. The cameras flashed. I looked out at the audience, and for a second, I saw Maria in the back of the room. She was holding her breath. I looked down at the document on the podium. It was the Blight Declaration. All it needed was my name. For a long time, I began, my voice clear and steady. I believed that progress was something that happened from the top down. I believed that to build something great, you had to be willing to make sacrifices. I looked at Weston. He was smiling, nodding encouragingly. But I've learned that the most important structures aren't made of steel. I continued. They're made of trust. And they're made of truth. I picked up the document and held it up for the cameras. This report claims that the East Side is a blighted area. It claims that the families there want to leave. But I've spent the last week talking to those families. And what I found wasn't blight. I found a community. I found history. And I found evidence of a systematic attempt to harass them into leaving. The room went deathly silent. I could feel the heat of Weston's gaze, but I didn't turn around. As the head of the Blake Foundation, I cannot sign this, I said. In fact, I am officially withdrawing the Foundation's support for the New Dawn project. Furthermore, I am announcing a $10 million endowment from my personal marriage settlement funds to permanently protect the East Side Community Center. Chaos erupted. The city officials began whispering frantically. The cameras were a frenzy of motion. Weston stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Elara, what are you doing?" he hissed under the noise of the crowd. "I'm making a move, Weston," I whispered back. "Just like you taught me." "You're destroying the merger," he growled. "No," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm saving your soul. Or what's left of it. If you want this merger, you'll do it without the East Side. You'll build around them. And you'll pay for their new park. If you don't, well, I have the logs of the shell companies you used to bribe the city council. Do you want to see those on the screen next?" Weston froze. For the first time in his life, he was outmaneuvered. He looked at the cameras, then at the angry city officials, then at me. He realized the trap I had set. If he fought me now, he'd go to prison. If he agreed, he'd lose the land but keep his empire and his wife. He took a deep breath. He turned to the cameras and forced a smile that looked like a scar. "My wife is always looking for a better way," he said, his voice tight. "And she's right. We will build around the community. We will listen. The Blake-Vance merger will be a partnership of the people." The crowd cheered, but I knew the battle wasn't over. That night, back at the penthouse, the silence was different. It wasn't cold. It was heavy with a new kind of respect. Weston was sitting on the balcony, looking out at the city he no longer fully controlled. "You knew I wouldn't let you fall," I said, joining him. "I knew you were dangerous," he replied, not looking at me. "I just didn't think you'd be dangerous to me. I'm your partner, Weston, not your puppet. If you want a wife, you have to accept that I have my own vision for this empire." He finally looked at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a strange, dark admiration. He reached out and touched the ring on my finger. "I suppose I'll have to update my risk assessment," he said. "You do that," I said, leaning against the railing. "Because tomorrow, we start on the new plans for the South Wing. And this time, I'm the lead architect." The story of the abandoned bride was over. The story of the woman who married the CEO was just beginning. And in this story, I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. I was the one holding the pen. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.